Well, hello there, friends. Welcome back to the Real Life Practice Podcast. I am so glad to be with you. I'm your host, Teresa McCloy, and we are in a new series. Lindsay, why don't you go ahead and introduce our series for us and give us a little background of where we're headed these next few episodes?
We are in a series that we are calling Seasons of Formation, and we are looking at how our faith grows through different stages and also how our life development progresses in different decades. And we're looking at how these often go together. Not always. There are times that maybe our stage of life and our season of formation might not look like someone else's, but there are some trends and some patterns that we tend to see. And so in this season of the podcast, we're going to talk about what that looks like and what we can learn about ourselves and God as we look at those concepts. And the way that we're going to do that is by interviewing people in different decades of life. And so we'll look at someone in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, kind of across the gamut, and look at what does spiritual life look like in different decades of life when we look at our life circumstances and what's going on in our everyday, ordinary life. How does our life with God grow and develop in different decades?
And we are excited today to have our very first guest. And he's like, "Oh, I'm the first." Lucas Golden, it's great to have you, a friend of both Lindsay and I's. And, you fit the bill as the decade. we, he's like, "Where do I fall in this?" So, welcome to the podcast, Lucas.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun conversation. Is we all know each other. We've done some life together. We've served in ministry together. And yet, Lucas brings his own unique story to the podcast today, just as someone falling in that decade of the 30s, and just what is life for him right now. And so, Lucas, I'm just going to let you set us up first with just a little bit about, you, your family, where you're at in life, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah. So I'm 37, so that's how I qualify for this podcast. I'm officially in my later 30s. I'm a husband. Emily and I have been married for 13 years. I'll share a little bit, I think maybe later, about how our stories converged as part of my faith story. But we both grew up here in Effingham, Illinois. We have 4 kids. Our age range is from 10 to 2. It's like the driving positions, right? 10 to 2. And I'm a worship pastor here in Effingham at New Hope Church. I've been on staff in my role now for 15 years, which is crazy. You're saying I'm the early decade, but I'm starting to feel like the old guy. So yeah, that's a little about me.
Yeah. Well, it is great to have you. As I said, when we were talking about people in these different decades, you came to mind because I have known you for a very long time, since before you were married, as has Lindsay. And so just to watch someone's formational story kind of happen before your eyes and just to see that has just been a joy. I will say that. But Lindsay, let's dive in just a little bit as we just kind of walk with Lucas through what this looks like. What is formation? He's gone from his 20s now into his late 30s. And let's dive in a little bit to the story.
Yeah, I think as Teresa was saying, Lucas, we've known each other a long time. I think when I first met you, you were in college, I believe. So yeah, we go back a long way, and it's been cool to see your growth and just in your family. I'm in a different decade than you. I'm in my 40s, but my girls are the same age as your oldest daughter. And so we have some similarities there, but you're definitely still in the younger kid years. So I'm excited to hear just what that looks like for you right now. But before we talk about now, I would love for you to share with us a little bit about your faith journey. What has that looked like for you?
Sure. Well, I grew up here in Effingham. I grew up in a Christian home, and my parents actually got involved in New Hope pretty early on in the life of the church, when they were meeting in a local YMCA, and it looked very different. I think just like any startup church, it's kind of like the warm body approach of all hands on deck. Like everybody's very involved in everything. And so like as kids, we were just at every church event. And early on too, it's like there's few hands. So you're involved in setting up chairs and cleaning up after and all that. And so I feel like even in my faith journey, I know sometimes they can look different for every person. Sometimes there's like this dramatic conversion event. And for me, it just felt like I was kind of grafted into the family from a young age. And so obviously there have been like important moments in my Christian journey, but a lot of it has just been like consistently surrounded by people who have modeled the Christian life for me well. And I'm super thankful for that. Again, just from an early age, being involved in the church has been really formative, and obviously has shaped like where I'm at and even my career. Now it's cool because Emily's family my wife's family got involved at New Hope early on too. And so we grew up in the youth group together, and I don't know, even just how God has used that to bring us together has been really neat. And so, yeah, we're just really thankful for the community around us. Like I said, I feel like there haven't been my faith journey isn't like this dramatic conversion event, but it's one of just like consistently seeing God's hand throughout my life, and just key people. Have been surrounded by mentors and coaches and people who have just modeled what it looks like to walk with Christ for most of my life. So I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that, you say that your story, there's not like a dramatic thing that happened, but it's pretty unique that you grew up at New Hope and now you are on staff as the worship pastor at New
Yeah.
Hope. That says a lot about
Yeah.
just your faith journey and your consistency and faithfulness. And like you said, the people that were around you that encouraged you and helped you move forward. So that's a pretty unique story. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, I had a professor that actually kind of warned me against, because
Mhm.
and again, it's kind of a God story how I ended up here, where I went away to college and studied worship leadership because of a lot of the passion and interest that was formed through my experience here. And then this position opened up right as I graduated, which is just a cool God thing. But I had a professor who was like, all right, the people who change your diapers don't want you leading them in worship. It's kind of like talking to your parents about money or politics. But my experience has been completely otherwise. And even just the vision of the
Mhm.
church of so much of the heart and the DNA of the church is bringing up that next generation. So it's been cool to be able to be an example and a model of that.
That's kind of where your story and my story crossed. Is I remember when I was actually a worship pastor at another church across town, and you moved back, and we started getting together once a week, pretty much, pretty consistently, with a couple of other people, and really just talking about worship and leading at our churches and what that looked like to build teams and all of that. So I'm just always so grateful for that time. It was always just such a blessing for me, because I think part of formation, even though we're years apart, we were serving in same roles. And to have that place where you can just be honest with another person and talk with them about the hard things in life or ministry. And it was before you and Emily were even married, and all of those things. It was just such a cool time. And I think that's something in life when you can find community around you. That is something that is so valuable as part of formation. Is just who are your mentors, who's your coaches, who's people that are speaking into your life, or you're allowing them to speak in others' lives. And I know you have that, even you and Emily, as part of small groups and different things that you do throughout the church. How have people been a part of that for you, Lucas, as you've moved through your 20s into your 30s?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's hard to think of how people haven't been a part of that, honestly. I mean,
Mhm.
because like I said, like we're just so grateful for a community that's just been consistent throughout our lives. And you mentioned this, but there are so many others that have seen us
Mm.
at every stage and walked with us through every stage. And I think we realize, but probably don't fully realize the uniqueness of that, of just being surrounded by people who know the intimate details of our lives. They know the struggles that we've had. They know that they've celebrated the joys that we've had with us. But yeah, I think just a lot of the people here were reasons that we wanted to move back, that we both even started our careers back in this area, because it was hard to think about doing life outside of the people that we grew up loving and knowing.
No, no, that's good. But I know there's challenges too. So, Lindsay, let's dive in. we'll pull a little bit of threads here for you, Lucas, of what have been some of the, God stories, the formational things that happen in this season that we might have. So, Lindsay, what are we thinking?
Yeah, I would love to hear first, Lucas, just, in this life stage, I know you're a worship pastor, you've got young kids at home, a full life, lots going on. I know the challenges of parenthood and what that can bring and how that shifts your life with God. I would just love to hear from you. What are some of the unique challenges in this current life stage when it comes to your life with God?
Yeah, you named it. I feel like just that lack of uninterrupted time
I'd
is
love to
it's
tell you that gets
always
better, but
yeah, it's always a challenge. Of course, like having 4 kids, it's all hands on deck. It feels like the majority of the time. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely one of the unique challenges right now is just that it requires a lot of time and attention constantly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How have you noticed God meeting you in those challenges?
Yeah, I think this was something I still wrestle with, but early on, I think specifically after we had our second child, there was kind of this tension point where I felt like I didn't know. It seemed like I was just constantly distracted. And I think I internally, subliminally thought that my kids were like my biggest distraction from the spiritual life. And actually, through some work, even in spiritual direction with a friend that helped me name some of that, one of the key practices that I learned through that was, and I'm sure you guys are familiar, kind of naming consonance, dissonance, which I loved
Mhm.
just even as a musician, that it's a musical term that there's
Mhm.
consonance where things just sit well and are in harmony, and then there's dissonance where it seems like it kind of clashes. And I felt like in that season there was just a lot that didn't seem like it was at harmony, that there was a lot that was clashing, but sometimes there's an invitation in that. And it's not that dissonance is always bad, but there was kind of this death that was happening inside of me of thinking, you know what, you always get your way. You get everything goes according to your plan. You pursue your own interests. And it's like when there's more bodies in the house, like that just doesn't, you kind of have to die to the selfishness. And so that was the dissonance I was feeling, was just that I was pursuing a lot of my own selfish interests. The spiritual work I had to do was kind of letting go of that. And I think because Emily and I grew up knowing each other really well, a lot of people experience that early on in marriage where two people come together and you're like, all right, we have very different opinions on things and very different hobbies and ideas for how things are going to go. I think we knew each other so well that we didn't experience that as
Mhm.
great other couples might. But having kids, I definitely experienced that. And so I think like God oftentimes does, what felt like death, God brought life out of it. What I thought was the biggest distraction from my spiritual formation was actually where I needed to be formed most.
Mhm.
And so where I thought my kids were like going to be the death of me, it's actually now an area that I can experience joy in life and being present with them.
No. You're naming something I think really important for people in this decade and this season, both life stage. So we talked in the first episode of this series about stages of life, but also stages of faith. And there's always a death and a resurrection, I think, in stages of faith. And yeah, and doing it in your marriage and yeah, kids are even though we think we're the teachers, they're quite the teachers really for us and what they cause. But if you would, just from a practical standpoint, Lucas, and I'm kind of putting you on this spot, but I always think through what does that look like practically? Because you named, like, I had to let go of some things. I remember in our story and our faith journey, and it sounds really strange, but Dale giving up like playing fast pitch softball anymore. That was his like thing, that he did or whatever. And I think when our son was about in fifth or sixth grade and he started into sports, it was like, this is probably the season for me, which that's not some big formation thing, but yet it is. It's that humility and that selflessness. Just from a practical standpoint, what that look like for you as you say, I wanted the things for me. And then I realized I'm kind of letting some of those things go for now. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean we won't come back to them.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, there's the obvious examples of like the evening commitments of softball leagues and, going to hang out with
Hmm.
friends and things like that. But there's also just the daily examples of, hey, I'm in the middle of this project right now. And sometimes that's okay. But sometimes it's like, no, you need to drop this project and be like attentive to your son who wants to go throw a ball. And I think before it felt like death because I'm like, no, I have this idea of how my day is going to go and this is what I had planned. And so I would end the day and just be like, man, I didn't get anything done. I felt stressed. But now it's like, okay, you can still be productive and get things done. But if I can also be attentive to my family, man, I really enjoy throwing a ball with my son.
Hmm.
There's a lot of joy in life in that. And so some of it has just been learning to enjoy different things and finding enjoyment in spending time, taking interest in the things that they're interested in.
It's good.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Lucas. And I can definitely relate to so much of what you are saying about all of this. Parenting is such a deeply formational place. And I love how you named that it's in those unexpected places that God is forming us. And it's
Mhm.
kind of changing what our expectation is of what is a day well spent. And like you said, it
Mhm.
takes discernment because, like, we do have to get things done and we need to be productive and there's stuff that has to happen. But when is the invitation to set that aside and just be present with our kids and what I've learned about how God just wants to be present with me as I've learned to do that as well. So I love how you name that.
Lindsay, I think one of the things you're saying there, right, is we talk about this often through the work we do at the Real Life Process, through this podcast, is the difference between deciding and discerning. So, Lucas, you mentioned that. Like, I had decided how my day was going to go. And that's very me centered sometimes, not always, but, we lay out a plan and we decide something. And then we learn that we hold discernment of, my son is asking me to throw a ball or my daughter wants to do this. And I think you guys homeschool as well. Is that true? Some of the kids or not all of them. I never know which way it's going. But
Yeah.
that's a different, you know, you're just around more. Sometimes you're at the church, I know, but you're just around home more. The kids are there. And so there's a discernment that happens too of which should I do right now? And the more we can shift life to discernment instead of decision and holding that decision tight fisted, I think you're in that season right now, right? Of letting go and going, okay, everything's not like this. In our 20s, I think it kind of is sometimes of like deciding where I'm going to go to school. I'm deciding, when I'm going to get married, if I'm going to get married, if I'm going to date, not date. Like there's just these definite decisions. And I love what you're naming of just even having a spiritual director. Lindsay and I are both spiritual directors as well as coaches, but yet seeking out spiritual direction. When did that start forming in your life that you actually started working with a spiritual director?
Yeah, I was actually just looking back at that in preparation for this podcast, and it was funny looking at the timing because it was like the winter of 2019, early winter 2020. And I was like, man, what perfect timing because not
Yeah.
long after that, I was at home with the family constantly. There was no like going to
Mhm.
work. And just thankful that I think that was definitely a God thing that was formed during that time where it was like kind of learning to enjoy and be attentive to and present with my family. And again, just I mean, if I can truly enjoy that time with my wife and my kids and not just be constantly looking for it out, there's so much life in God to be found there. A book that was recommended to me during that time that you guys may be familiar with. It's called Domestic Monastery. I only read the
Mm.
first chapter of it, but it's by Ronald Rollheiser,
Mhm.
and he mentions that there's a monk that's commenting on his mother who spent 30 years raising kids. He was convinced was more contemplative and selfless than he was, even though he'd spent his entire life in a monastery. And so I love that because I think sometimes in my mind, like spirituality meant like withdrawal and isolation and solitude. when really like those relationships that were closest to me were the vehicle God was using to shape me and to form me.
Mhm. So good. That's really rich what you're naming. And I think it's part of the turn that happened or can happen in the decade that you're in, if it's allowed, if you open up the space to allow God. And that's why I want to talk about using a spiritual director, because I don't know, I think there's some stigmas around, oh, I'm going to see a spiritual director when I'm in my 50s or my 60s and I'm going into second half of life. And you and Lindsay both, 30s and 40s, are leaning in. And what could it be from someone in that younger years? To me, I often look back and say, wow, if I would have had someone to companion me in my 30s and 40s, how would my life have been different? Because it's one of the hardest seasons, the season you're naming. So, yeah, just thank you for sharing that that is something you've sought out and done.
Yeah, I know for myself, I often talk about my motherhood and spiritual direction when I meet with my director. That is a key place that God forms me, is through my
Mhm.
parenting. And it sounds like even when you met with your spiritual director, that was a place that you were feeling that tension of that competing desires and demands within your life. And it's a place God deeply forms us. And so I love that you are finding new ways of connecting with God in that place. And I would love to hear from you, just as we talk about on this podcast often spiritual practices and routines and rhythms and what that day to day life with God looks like. What do your current spiritual practices look like in your life?
I'll preface this one with a quote, or I guess a story that I heard recently. It was from a pastor who had done a funeral for a man who had been part of his church for basically his lifetime. And he was giving the eulogy, and he described the man as someone who was easily edified, that it didn't take much to encourage him spiritually. And in this article, the pastor was talking about how, I mean, we have the word of God, we have the spirit of God, we've got the people of God. What more could we need? And I think something that God's shown me recently is that I underestimate just what's available to me and
Mhm.
people and the people that God surrounded me with. Sometimes I can be critical of those people or those resources or whatever season God's put me in. But God's teaching me more to notice and to be thankful for that. And so I think uniquely just trying not to overcomplicate the spiritual life of just some of it's just a posture of trust of God. Like the people that you've put around me right now, I'm trusting that are the people that like I need, that
Mm.
they need me. And so even practically, Teresa, you mentioned earlier that we've led a small group. And so this last season, our small group was more extending an invite to people who lived like specifically in our block, in our community, where it's not seeking as many external resources for spiritual guidance and nourishment, but it's like, God, who have you put in my path? And just trusting that God's going to provide in that way. A song that I heard recently, it's from Andrew Peterson. It's called the Centering Prayer, I think. Centering Prayer song. But a refrain in the song is, I want to be where my feet are. And I
Mhm.
just love that expression. I'm thinking that, I mean, even you guys could probably think that, even thinking back to what I was saying with my kids, where sometimes I could be present in the moment and I want to be somewhere else, but I'm like, no, God, I want to be where you've got me. And I'm just trusting that wherever I'm at right now is where you've called me, where you're working in me.
That's
Yeah.
so good, because for no matter what season of life you're in, and I often begin my day that way too, because I'm a planner, I'm a future thinker. And so, and when you're in your 30s, late 30s, it's like, oh, when I'm 50, the kids will be grown. You can get ahead of yourself, so to speak. And just that slow, deep work that God's doing in every day of like, whatever you bring today, Lord, this is what it says it's on my calendar or whatever. But I know you've got some interruptions in the day that are also going to happen, and by kids, by other people, phone calls, whatever they are. And just to be present to those is wise. So thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
So kind of in that, I guess I didn't fully answer the question. I was like getting to it, but um, in that, in kind of recognizing the localness, like the practicality of who God's put in our lives, one thing is just like pouring into relationships and receiving from relationships, both through small group. Like there's a men's Bible study that I'm part of regularly, where naturally I think I go more inward spiritually. Like I gravitate more toward like the contemplative, like time by myself, going on prayer walks. But this season, God's been challenging me more to be like involved in community in unique ways. I think just I've been feeling especially thankful for people who know what's going on in my life, who are sitting around a table and praying for me. Like I know what's going on in their life. There's a uniqueness to that that can't be found in online resources.
Mhm.
But I'm just so thankful for that. Just that to be active and part of a community.
It's good.
Yeah, I love that community aspect of your spiritual practice and that people who know you in your everyday life is so important. So I love that that's something that you highlighted. Lucas, I would be curious just to know as you think about this season of your life and what God is forming in you right now. What would you say if you had to name like this is kind of what God's doing in me, right? Like you said, like in this moment, right now in this season, how would you name that right now?
Yeah, I think the words that come to mind to me are trust, presence, and intentionality. Um, And like I said before, I think we can or I can overcomplicate things. So it begins with trust of just trusting God that He's put the people around me, that He has me in this season, that He's with me in this season. To be present, like I said, just I want to be where my feet are. God, help me to notice where you're present, where you're ministering to me, but also where I get the opportunity to minister to others. And intentionality with that, just believing that the Holy Spirit's working inside me and the people around me, taking those opportunities to voice encouragement, to take opportunities to confess where I mess up, to ask for, to receive prayer. Yeah, again, it's just trying not to overcomplicate it because I can naturally do that, but just noticing those opportunities that I trust that God's putting before me daily, both to be ministered to, but also to minister to others.
Because when you're sharing with, because as you mentioned, you have a small group, you have people your age that you're hanging out with. And what do you think are the unique benefits of this particular life stage? If you were talking to a friend over coffee and what you're walking through, what do you what are the benefits of this season of life that you might say to someone else? Even though it's a hard season, you've named a lot of, the kids, the family, the marriage, the career. We didn't even talk about, just being a pastor and trying to have your own formational life while you're walking with others. You've named that really well. But what would you say are some of the benefits or the joys of this season?
Yeah, I think I've can name this more now than I could early in my 30s, but I think about Jesus himself, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And so there's so many opportunities that to serve that again it kind of feels like death sometimes in the moment, but there's so much fulfillment in life that's found in that. And I think even being able to form and see my kids begin to serve one another and to find how they can serve both our church family and our immediate family. I think the uniqueness of this season is just it's forming that selflessness,
Mm.
which isn't an easy. It's not something that it's kind of like people say, don't pray for patience because God will give you lots of opportunities. It's kind of like, yeah, don't pray for selflessness and humility because God will definitely find ways to humble you. And I don't think God has to help me with that sometimes, but yeah, I think that's been some of the uniqueness in maybe later in my 30s. I'm like recognizing the joy in that, where early on it felt more like just death.
I think it's interesting though that you've really named that full circle, because when you started telling us about your faith journey, you were talking about how you grew up serving and whether it's putting away chairs or doing the things, or you were there in the midst, and yet you're back here almost to your 40s teaching your family and leading by example in some of the same ways. see you, have your kids doing different little things at whatever is age appropriate and those kind of things. So it's cool that you're following that same faith path
Mhm.
that you experienced is something I'm hearing. It's just the parallel of your story, which many of us often do, right? I mean, we come full circle, and it's just so interesting to see what forms in us in our 30s and 40s, those two, career driven decades many times, and then what we slowly let go of and unravel and let go of again and let go of again. I would love to encourage both of you that all of that humility and stuff gets learned and we don't, but it just looks different, and it's just how God continues to form us. But love the parallels in your story of how you grew up and now how you're bringing your kids into that as well.
Yeah, I think too, it's so neat how some of the things that you've named in the resource that we have for this season about kind of the questions that we're asking at different decades and stages of life. Where you're at, the key question is, how can I embrace and contribute to the world? So I really hear that coming out in what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious what you notice, even as you think about your role as a pastor and how that connects to your life with God. Like, what comes up for you when you even hear that question and think about how the work that you do connects to your life with God?
Yeah, it's funny because something that we've been talking to the kids about is just some of the early questions of the faith that are just
Mm-hmm.
foundational, like why am I here? Who is God? All of these things. And so I've been looking at some of the early resources of like catechisms and things like that that are helpful in
Mm-hmm.
being able to name some of just the essential truths of the faith. And one of the Westminster Catechism is, what's the chief end of man? It's to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And I think specifically in my role as a worship pastor, man, it's pretty easy to draw the parallel between, like, man, I get consistent opportunities. Just allow people to come into a room and to give them language to glorify God and hopefully to enjoy Him. And I'm learning to, like I was saying, I'm learning to enjoy Him in the season that I'm in. And so hopefully I can help steer people on what that looks like, whatever journey or whatever stage they're at in their life. But I think it's been helpful. Again, kind of going through some of those questions with my kids, it's making me think about, man, what's my life look like in this pursuit of glorifying God and enjoying Him?
Well, and that goes really well with the resource that we're providing for the podcast. We have a resource that Lindsay has put together about, just like some of those questions you're sharing that your kids are asking, that we're asking. There's in our stages of life and stages of faith, there are these deeper questions that come along, which kind of led to this whole podcast series of what does each season look like in our faith journey. So we'll have that as a download for any of you that are listening in and want to look at that. And, Lucas is just saying he's looking at those things. How can I share with my kids? How can I be in that place? And so this resource might be something, whether you're a grandparent, whether you're a parent, not even to that stage in life yet, but might be helpful to just see in writing, what are the questions that people ask at these different stages? What's forming in us? And that might be a great resource. So, Lucas, thanks so much just for sharing just a small window into this stage of life, into your personal story and what that's looked like as you've lent into community and people to walk with you, as well as just your neighborhood. I love what you were sharing there of, where are my feet and where are they planted? So, Lindsay, I'll let you wrap us up today and bring it to a close.
Well, thanks so much, Lucas, for sharing your story. And what we love about this season of the podcast is that we can all learn from each other no matter what decade we're in. And so, whether it's someone who is farther down the road than us or someone who is where we have been, part of the vision of this series is we can all learn from each other. And so I'm just grateful for the wisdom that you've shared today. And I know it's been encouraging to our listeners. So everyone, make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss any of these conversations that we are hosting. I know I'm looking forward to learning so much just from each decade as we hear the stories of other people and what God is doing in their life. Make sure to check out the show notes to get your free download about life stages and seasons of formation and the questions that we are asking in each stage. That's such a good resource that Sybil Towner and Susan Shadid put together and have graciously let us use at the Real Life Process. And so check that out as well. Also want to make sure we mention that a resource that can help you as you are looking at your life stages is One Life Maps. This is where you recognize and respond to God in your story. So even as we talk about the stage that we're in, it's such a helpful process to both look back and look ahead at what God is forming in our story. And so we now offer those digitally. So it's easy to access, available for you at onelifemaps.com. So check that out as well. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. And we look forward to joining you next time as we continue to explore the seasons and stages of faith. We'll see you in a couple weeks.